decision, or maybe it was not even something of your own volition, something that just happened that you just seen was so catastrophic that you just go, I'll never recover from this. I'll never be in God's good graces again. It might, maybe you haven't been there. I have been there. I've been there when I've had things happen in my life that were just so fundamentally, just ground shaking for me that I thought my life will never come back. And sometimes it's not even stuff that I did or a mistake that I make. It's just a circumstance that happens. I was talking to my brother, Matt, and he lost his daughter was, I think, 13 at the time. She got hit by a car, and just a stupid random accident, and he lost his daughter. And I was talking to him. I go, I look back and I go, things are not always as bad as you think they are. And he goes, no, sometimes they're exactly as bad as they think they are. And it's true. There's things that happen, decisions that we make, things that happen to us, things that happen in circumstances that we just can feel so completely abandoned by God, abandoned by God's people, that we just think there's no coming back. And academically, we might know that there is a path back, but for all intents and purposes, we don't really feel like that. And I don't know if that resonates with you. I know that I have felt that. Just some big changes in life that's happened down through many years, and things you just go, I don't know what the future is going to look like, for me. And I've talked with a lot of other people that made decisions. That made decisions maybe in their marriage, in their careers, and they made catastrophic decisions in terms of the law. They got themselves in trouble with addictions and with the wrong people. The list can go on and on and on, and you can just feel very, very, very far from God. So if that resonates with you even just a little bit, there's this story I wanted to circle back. And last week, we talked about Naaman, the great Syrian general. I think you guys might remember that. But just in case you missed it, the story of Naaman is one that if you grew up with those illustrated Bible books, you probably at least can remember the story to some extent. But Naaman was a great general in the Syrian army. The Syrian nation was enemies of Israel and would do horrible things with them. But there would be times where they would sort of would have some camaraderie. They would sort of become allies for a season. And so this is kind of one of those weird seasons where they're kind of in a truce kind of a season. And Naaman, this great general in the Syrian army, he has leprosy. And the leprosy at that time is not something we know a ton about, other than that it was incurable. It was very contagious. And it was basically, if you got the sentence of leprosy, if the diagnosis, it meant that you would be alienated from people. It meant that you had to be sequestered. It meant it was a very lonely, isolating life that carried with it a lot of stigma. So this great general has leprosy. So it's actually the general's daughter who says, not his daughter, rather, it's a slave girl that's serving in his court. She's an Israelite girl that they captured on one of the raids, so it's an Israelite slave. She says, hey, there's a great prophet in Samaria. Let's go see him. So he asks his king, Ben-Hadad, if he can go. King says, all right, sends a bunch of treasure with him to be able to reward and bring as a gift to the prophet Elisha to heal him. And he goes to see him. And Elisha doesn't even get out of his house. He doesn't even come out of his house. He just says, well, tell him, he says, tells his servant, says, go tell him to wash 7 times in the Jordan River and he'll be healed. He doesn't like that answer because he's a great military leader. He's a great person. He doesn't want to be told to go dunk himself in a muddy, junky old river. And so he leaves all in a huff, and his feelings are hurt. And his servant said, listen, if he had told you to do something heroic or brave or hard, you would do it. So this is easy. Let's just go do it, and let's see what happens. So he does. He goes, and he immerses himself 7 times, and he's healed. So he brings all of this treasure back. He brings his treasure to Elisha, and he says, hey, I want to reward you. And Elisha says, no, I don't want any of it. Can't give it to me. And so Naaman leaves. Now, Gehazi, who we've been introduced to the story before, Gehazi is the servant of Elisha. He feels like Elisha let him off easy. So he runs after him. Now, mind you, the guy brought 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and dozens, 10 changes or like 70 pounds of fine clothing. So he brought really, really expensive gifts, even by today's measure, by today's standard. So Gehazi runs after him, and he says, hey, my master's changed his mind. He's going to send a couple of servants out to get some of this treasure, which, of course, Elisha hadn't done. And the guy says, sure, take a couple 100 pounds of silver, take, 100 pounds of gold. He says, sure, just take what you want. So he takes a bunch of it back, he hides it, and then Elisha, of course, because he's a prophet, knows what he's done. And he said, you didn't think my spirit would be with you? You didn't think I would know? And then he says something that I think is really curious. He says, we don't need vineyards. We don't need male and female servants. We don't need we don't need fields. We don't need any of the things. He's obviously been offered this stuff before. Elisha had a lot of influence on all of the surrounding nations. So he's obviously used to this. He says, no, we're fine. We don't need this. And you were disobedient to me because you lied. So the leprosy that left Naaman is now on you. Okay, so this is terrible judgment, and he would know what it meant. He would know that this meant like serious health problems. He knew that there would be it would get worse and worse and worse as time would go. It'd be contagious. He wouldn't be able, as an Israelite, so he wouldn't be able to worship in the temple, which there was a new temple in Samaria, and so he knows all these things. It's a really horrible thing to be a leper in that culture, which you can think of like when Jesus reached out to the lepers and he would touch them and he would speak with them. He'd lay hands on them. He'd bring healing to them. What it must have meant to them, because lepers didn't get touched by anybody because you could get leprosy. So it's this very isolating life. So he's got this sentence, and he's got to feel very, very far from God, very far from the people of God. And let's be honest, what he did in terms of what, like, probably humans think, I keep thinking to myself, it's not great, but it's not all that bad. All he did was say, hey, I just think Elisha let him off a little bit easy. I'd like to get my part of that, So he went out there, he told a little lie. I mean, I kind of look at it and I go, I don't know that it's worth like a whole sentence of leprosy in the grand scheme of things, but he shouldn't have done it. But I wonder how many times he's thinking of that and saying, wow, that was an absolutely catastrophic mistake that I made. I knew it was wrong. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, but it ended up with absolutely disastrous results. So there's a few like events that happen while he's carrying this, but we know that Gehazi would be a lifetime servant of Elisha. So because there's a story at the very beginning where he's with the Shunammite woman, and we talked about that. This Shunammite woman, her husband, had a relationship with Elisha, built him a little place in their house, and then there's this story, and then there's the next story, and then like 10 years later, there's another story of him advocating for the Shunammite woman before the king. So he's got this long history with Elisha, even after he's had been given this sentence of leprosy. So I want you to put yourself in Gehazi's shoes and his place just for a moment, because really that's what biblical interpretation is. It's trying to put yourself into the picture, into the story, so we could really understand what's happening. So you've made this terrible mistake. You didn't think it was that big of a deal, but you did it, and the consequences were disastrous. And how many people do we know, or maybe in our own lives, have we made mistakes that had catastrophic decisions? And so we can feel very far from God, very far from God's people, very alienated, very alone. And this is certainly where Gehazi is feeling. Now the next story, this happens several years after this. And it's still, Naaman is still the great general, and Ben-Hadad is still the king of Syria. And they're now at war again. And Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, is making all of these plans. So he'll send troops over here, he'll send troops over there, and everywhere that he sends his troops, wherever he makes his plans against Israel, Elisha knows. So Elisha alerts the king of Israel and says, hey, the Syrians are going to be here, or the Syrians are going to be there, or that he always knows their playbook. And to the point that the king of Syria gets very angry. He goes, I have somebody inside that's giving away this information. Who is it? And one of his leaders says, listen, there's this prophet in Samaria who is who's giving away all of your trade secrets. He's giving away all of your plans, and they know where you are. It's this prophet. He says, well, we got to find out where this prophet is. So they find out where he's at. He's in a place called Dothan, a city of Dothan, near Samaria. And so he sends a whole army to Dothan and completely surrounds the city. Now, the servant in this story is not named, but I believe that this is still Gehazi, because whenever it refers to the servant of Elisha, it always refers to Gehazi. Whenever in other contexts, it'll say one of the servants or one of Elisha's servants. But when it says the servant, it's always this guy Gehazi. So he wakes up one morning, and the whole city is surrounded with troops. Horses, chariots, the one of the most powerful armies on the planet at the time. And he's fearful. And he goes to Elisha, and he goes, Lord, what are we going to do? And Elisha goes, I can just picture him kind of like, eating his oatmeal. And he goes, don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. He said, there's more of us than there are of them. Now, the servant is nonplussed. I mean, he's looking at this sea of soldiers and horses and chariots surrounding the city. And his crazy boss is saying, no, don't worry. There's more of us than there are of them. And Elisha just prays, Lord, open his eyes. And Gehazi's eyes are opened up, and he's able to see that surrounding this huge army is a heavenly army of horses, chariots of fire surrounding the whole area. And Elisha just prays, Lord, blind them. So the Syrian army is completely blinded. Elisha goes up to the leaders and says, hey, you've got the wrong city. Elisha's not here. I'm going to take you to him. So he takes him to Samaria, which is where the Israelite king is, brings him into the city where they are now surrounded. And the king of Israel says, well, what should I do with him? Should I kill him? And he goes, no, give him a good meal and send him on home. So at that point, he prays, Lord, open their eyes. So now the Syrians' eyes are open. And they see that they're completely at the whim of the king of Israel, who then feeds them and sends them back to Syria. Now, in some respects, this is a really heartbreaking story, because the Syrian army would then lay waste to Israel. In fact, in Samaria itself, where it was besieged, it would say just a few ounces of literally of dove dung would go for, apparently you can eat it, would go for a lot of money. A donkey's head would go for, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which, nobody wants to eat a donkey head, but that's what they were too. So it's just terrible, terrible famine. And I think I might talk a little bit about that too, because there's a good story in there too. But so this really kind of a crazy revelation of God's providence, his power, his care for his people. But I'm thinking of Gehazi. I keep thinking to myself of this guy who is kind of coming off. We don't know exactly how much time has passed, but I think it'd be several years of carrying around the burden of a very poor decision that completely upended his whole life, and thinking God is completely against me on this. I can't worship. I can't go into the temple. I can't do any of the things. I'm an outsider. I'm unclean. And all of a sudden, his eyes are open wide. And he sees an entire army that is for him. Elisha doesn't say, hey, I've got kind of the inside track. I got a whole army working for me. He goes, no, they're us. They're for us. Now, maybe this is just me, but when I've been in those sort of places where I'm feeling pretty either low or discouraged or far from God, not hearing from God, and I think of stories like this, of this entire heavenly army that is for me. It's for me, acting on my behest, in my favor. They want this is provided by God for me. That brings me extraordinary comfort, and it gives to me a perspective of whatever I'm going through. And I hope that it does you. If you found yourself at times and seasons where you felt far from God, far from God's people, maybe even just like a coldness in your heart, I hope that stories like that's why I like to talk about them, because God has not changed. I hope that you understand that there's a whole army of God's heavenly creatures that are assigned to his people. Now, you can't think of that story without thinking of another story, because there's a story of Jesus that's very similar. And the story of Jesus is right before, and all the Gospels have a version of it, where he's going to be crucified. So this is the night before. His Thursday night after the Passover meal, and so he's at Gethsemane with Peter and James and John, and you probably remember the story. He's feeling very distraught. He says, "Well, why don't you stay here? I'm going to go away and pray." And then he goes and prays, and he's wrestling with God. God, if you can take this from me, do it. Then he comes back, and the guys are sleeping. And he says, "You can't stay awake just for a little bit." And he goes and he does it again. And he's very distraught, and he's at one point he says he's weeping, sweating blood. It's just there's just a lot of anxiety, and he comes back, and his friends are sleeping again. Third time he does it, he says, "Wake up, my arresters are here." So the Roman troops are coming in, and it's just Jesus and his three friends. And Peter takes his sword out, cuts the Roman officer's ear off. And Jesus says, "Put the sword back." He said, "The person that draws the sword is killed by the sword. So put the sword back." He says, "Don't you know that I could just pray and God would send legions of angels?" In the same way that Elisha said, "Hey, look, just open his eyes. I just have to pray and there would be legions. I don't need this. I don't need your sword." And I think of this story, and I think of the story of Elisha, and the two are sort of designed to be a little bit of a picture of each story. But in one, the whole army is sort of taken into captivity. They're then fed and they're sent away. And the other, Peter is told to put his sword back. That's not what's necessary here at this moment. And I can't help, and I'm going to talk about what's going on in our country because I think we have to. And I know that it makes us uncomfortable when there's like political or stressful things that enter in, but we have to talk about it because we're the people of God. And when things happen and when people are losing their life, I believe that it has to be addressed from a spiritual and from a kingdom perspective. Otherwise, we're going to lose sight of what's really happening. So I'm going to try to do this in all fairness and see if we can figure out what's the next step. Now, we're at a place in sort of a deflection point where it doesn't really work to say we're going to have to agree to disagree on this because there's not really there's such contrasting views And it's hard for me, as I think it is for every believer, to wonder how can we be reading the same scripture and end up with very different conclusions. And I don't have the answer to that. I think it just teaches us that the Bible is a really complicated book. The gospel is simple, but the Bible is complicated. And I want you to think of the picture, particularly the one of Jesus, of the Roman troops coming in to arrest him. Who he's nobody. He's an agitator, to use words that's been floating around. He's an agitator. So they're going to go crucify him because you couldn't agitate in Rome. Now remember, and I think this is really helpful when you read the Gospels, just take that word Rome and put the word America in it. Now, I don't mean that in any sort of disparaging way. Part of the reasons it's so difficult for us to understand the gospel of Jesus is because we've never considered it from the perspective of the Jewish people. It's very hard for us to, because we've always been the people in power. So it's really hard to look at the gospel and understand it unless you can purposely place yourself in a diminished role. So you have to kind of put yourself in the diminished role of a state that was occupied by Rome. Rome was a massive empire. The Jewish people really had no power over it at all. And so then you have these soldiers coming in, and they're arresting this guy. Some guy pulls out a sword, cuts his ear off, and Jesus heals the ear and tells him to put his sword back, and then he's, of course, carried away and crucified. So when I say there's not an option for us to say, well, we have to agree to disagree. And here's why. Because the mandate of all Christian people, every follower of Jesus, we don't get to argue about this part. We don't get to say, well, I politely, respectfully disagree with you. The people of God are to be the people who pursue peace. It's our number one priority. It's the number one thing. So we have to find a way to have peace. And it's going to mean something different to everybody, because we can look at any one of these instances and we can say, let me put it another way. I don't know how this sits with you. I would have, one, defended those two women. Two, I probably would have been carrying. And three, I would probably be dead. Now, is that right or is that wrong? Maybe I would have heard the words of Jesus and said, no, don't carry into... Because the Second Amendment says that we can defend ourselves against tyranny, right? That's the whole purpose of it. But the law says there's almost no circumstance where you can resist arrest, right? There's none. So you just have to kind of go in there, so the two are sort of these little bit, kind of at odds with one another, because you can certainly carry. It's not illegal to carry in Minneapolis, but you can't resist arrest, or you're probably going to get shot. So probably the best wisdom is to not bring a weapon into an environment of this kind of a protest, because you can't, even though you have the constitutional right to carry, you don't have the legal right to resist arrest, right? So there's sort of this conundrum that exists in the middle of it. So I don't really think that I could say he shouldn't have brought in that weapon, but I can also say that he probably didn't anticipate that he was. So it's not illegal. It's not illegal to carry in Minneapolis, into Minnesota. It's also not illegal, but it is illegal to have, I think, excessive force in law enforcement, but you can't really do anything about it. You have to kind of just, not resist and go do your time in court, and hopefully you win your day in court. So I'm kind of a little bit in the weeds on that because there's all these different kinds of perspectives. And the only reason I say that is because every person, even sitting in this room, has, just like we talked a few weeks ago, have already sort of watched all the videos and drawn their conclusion. And they either are this. The conclusions are either this. He was protecting, and he had the right to protect, and he had the right to carry, and he shouldn't have been killed, or he shouldn't have been protesting at all or getting in the way of law enforcement at all, and he shouldn't have put himself in that position. He certainly shouldn't have been carrying. I mean, that's where it lines up. And that's why I bring it up, because it's complicated. So what's the path of wisdom? The path of wisdom, in my opinion, is, as I said, we have to find a place that we are all determined to do what Jesus said to do, which is to find a place of peace, a path forward. And I think that everybody who calls the name of Jesus, calls themselves a Christian, has to bear that responsibility. I mean, I think everybody does, regardless of how you might see things from a political perspective. And I think that, well, I don't think I know, that there is a path. There is a way to find it, but we have to be determined to find it. Even if that means we need to step back from some things that we believe to be very true or maybe very wrong. An example of this is, let's say you have this really strong conviction about the harm of immigration, of illegal immigration that's happening in our country. We have to do something about it. I don't believe this is the best way. And in fact, the Association of Minnesota Police Chiefs said exactly the same thing. They said, look, we are not advocating that the laws of immigration are not enforced. We're advocating that they are enforced, but we have to do it in a different way. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of civil rights abuses that are happening. We get hundreds and hundreds every single day. And they're even coming from off-duty law enforcement who are they're off-duty, but they're people of color, and they're also being harassed because they don't understand that they're cops. So I can say, any reasonable Christian can say, yes, we need to enforce the laws of our land, right? And we have immigration laws that need to be enforced. But there's a difference between how we enforce them. What is an appropriate response to the situation that exists? And I think that's the part that every Christian has to take ownership of. Every Christian has to take ownership. Even if you're completely and 100% for the decisions of this administration, let's say that's the case. Well, I'm going to support you in that. People vote for a lot of reasons. But I do think it's fair for me to ask you, can you look at where we are as a nation, and can you say, that's where I intended for us to be? This is what I wanted. And if the answer is yes, then God bless you. That's between you and God, and it's your right to exercise that perspective. If your answer is no, then I think you have an obligation to make sure that your elected officials understand that while you do want, and I think we all do want, some sort of solution to immigration, we want there to be a civil and a just response, an equal measure of response to the problem. And here's one of the current concerns that I have at what's happening is, how much are we willing to pay? My dad used to tell this story years ago of a little boy who wanted a whistle. Loved this whistle. And he went back and he got everything that he had. He went and got a bunch of toys, and he found all the stuff, and he went and he took it to the guy that had the whistle and said, I'd like to have that whistle. The guy said, no, I need that, and I need some cash. So he went back. He got all his cash. He got the cash, got the toys. He went back. He says, I want that whistle. He goes, no, I need more. I need you to come and mow my lawn and do some chores. So the boy goes over, does the chores. So he's got all his toys. He's got some money. He's got a bunch of chores. He goes, now I want that whistle. And the guy gave him the whistle, and he took the whistle home. And he's so happy about it. He takes and he blows it, and it doesn't work. And he goes, I paid too much for that whistle. I think about this with a lot of these types of things. Are we paying too much for a whistle? Like, I know we have all different ideas of immigration. I get it. I understand it. And I hope that Emerge will always be a place that is open to lots of different ideas. But is what's happening in the challenges that we have with immigration, is it worth the price that we're paying right now? Where the threads that are barely holding our culture together, our society together, are getting so pushed that we're at this threshold where the chaos that we're accepting as sort of our everyday new reality is, in my opinion, far worse than any challenges that we had with immigration. That's just the way I see it. I think we're paying way too much for the whistle. So I don't think and in fact, I think it's biblical to say, put the guns down. Put the sword back in the scabbard. That runs two ways. That's for people that see things one way, and for people that see things one way, the other way. Put the guns down. Everybody take a step back. Open our eyes, Lord, so that we can see there's way more to it than any of us are seeing. None of us own wisdom on this. None of us own all the wisdom on this. God does. But I think both from the story of Elisha and both the story of Jesus illustrate a really important part, particularly for our little church of 30 or 40 families. What can we really do? Well, I think we can put our swords away. I think we can have God pray that God would open our eyes so that we can find the peace and the comfort knowing that there's something so far bigger than all of this. There's more of us than there is of them. If we name the name of Jesus, we need to pursue peace and justice and love for all people. At the same time, we need to respect and honor the rule of law, but there's a right way of doing it and there's a wrong way of doing it. And we have to have thick skin, right? We have to have thick skin. We can't just squirrel away into our camps and say, this is, so if you're in one camp, I'm going to encourage you to get out and speak your mind, speak your heart, go to rallies, do the things that you feel are contributing. If you're on the other side of the camp, do your part to advocate for peace, to advocate for the rule of law, but for how we do it. There's a spirit in which law should be enforced. There's a fairness. Law enforcement should. I understand that it's gritty and it's difficult, but it shouldn't be chaotic. The rule of law should not be a chaotic one. It should bring organization and peace and structure to it. So do your part. Have thick skin. Don't come to odds with people that see things differently than you. But also, don't say, I have to respectfully agree to disagree, because that's not the path forward. Say, we have to pursue peace, because that's the mandate of Jesus. And I mean that. From a pastoral position, that part we do not have an option on. We have to pursue a path of peace. And I believe that we can do it. All right? Open our eyes and let us see that there's something way bigger that's happening here, and we're not going to figure it out here, but we can figure out what Jesus said. The words of Jesus are usually pretty clear, and on this one, it is. All right. Don't drop the mic. I'm not gonna. Yeah, I always. And if you want, and on at my door, I'm easy to get a hold of. So you might have heard something today that you're like, I just really disagree with you, and I would say, well, that's fine, but what's the path of peace? That's the path we have to find. Let's sing a few songs, short songs, happy songs. God, give us wisdom as your people. Jesus, our Lord Jesus, is called the Prince of Peace. He came to bring peace, and we're to be his presence here on planet Earth. Our presence should be a place of peace, of rest, of kind of a place of security and safety in the middle of a big storm. There's a lot of hotheads right now. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of heartbrokenness, but I'm reminded, and it's hard for me, I confess, I'm reminded that your word tells us that anger doesn't produce righteousness, but that you are near the brokenhearted. So I pray that we would all stay in this place of being brokenhearted and not let our anger or our frustration on either side of this, because everybody's angry right now. Help us to stay in a place of brokenheartedness, because in brokenness is where we find you. It's in brokenness that we find healing, that we find peace, and that we find a path and a place forward. I pray that you would help us to stay focused on this much bigger picture that we don't always understand. It's not an us and them thing. It's just people of the kingdom. It's people of the kingdom of Jesus that are supposed to care for the least of these, that are supposed to care for the things that Jesus cared. That's what it means to be a disciple. So for all of us, we have to maybe step back and put all of our swords away and figure out what that path of peace is, and let God's will prevail in all of it. I'm going to pray for Minnesota and the families of those who have lost loved ones, and we're going to pray for peace. I'm going to pray for our nation. I'm going to pray for our leaders. Already I'm hearing a lot of really good things from leaders that are saying this is not the way that we should be going. People on both sides of the political aisle, that there's a better way to do this. And so I'm just going to pray that this would be a conversation that would get tamped down, that we would be able to find the path and the wisdom of Jesus in all of this. I also pray that we would express ourselves, that we would speak with courage and with boldness, but with respect for one another. But more than that, help us not to just like politely go back into our camps, but to collectively find a way that allows for peace to prevail. And that's a hard thing to do, and I confess that sometimes it can be discouraging and it can be a little disheartening. But help us learn the lessons of the past and find this place that we as your people, even in our little church, that we can be leaders in a path of peace. We can find the common grounds. We can find the best ways of practicing the laws and the things that have to be enforced in our nation, but do it in a way that justice prevails, in a way that's humane. Open our eyes, Lord. Help us to see something far beyond what we're seeing right now, because right now we're just kind of seeing a lot of confusion, and it's easier to ignore probably than, but we can't be afraid of it. So I'm grateful for this congregation. I'm grateful for each person here. I'm grateful that we've always wanted to have the courage to have the hard conversations and then hopefully find the path of love and peace and clarity. And these next few months, I think, are going to be hard for a lot of people. It's going to be hard for us here in Iowa and our community in Bettendorf. It's going to be hard for Minnesotans. It's going to be hard for people all over our country. And if good decisions aren't being made now, it's going to get a lot worse. And I think that everybody can see the path that we're going down. And so I'm going to pray that we can somehow pull it all back, step back from everything, and find a better solution for the needs of our country. And we prayed in the name of Jesus.